first of all, you don't seem to be very bashful about your work or the history of the stuff you've done, and you've collaborated with, it looks like, dozens of people. And I know through collaborative attempts how difficult just collaborating with one person can be. You've collaborated with many different people. How does that all work for you? Why do you do it?
Yeah, no, I've never been accused of bashfulness in any capacity. In fact, I do work some as a figure model. So no, I have no shame. That helps. And when you are writing collaboratively with someone, you really are bearing all. Because you know that when you're writing from the heart, you're writing from the soul, writing from your life experience, you're going to places that potentially invade your privacy. And so to ask someone to do that with you, it really is kind of like playing doctor. There's nothing hidden at that point. I could not have done the collaborative writing in Unforgettable a dozen, 15 years ago. I didn't have the confidence and the assurance as a writer that it takes to say, I'm going to give up 50% of the control here. But in this new book, which has 50 stories in it, there are included 15 collaborations with 13 different authors. Men and women, professionals and amateurs, all over the map. And I gotta say that every single one of them worked to the satisfaction of my co-author and myself.
What is it that pulls you together with these other people? I mean, obviously it's you. I mean, as I read these, I see that McComas is the guy that's on point here. Well, I mean, I don't know 50-50. I don't know anything that works 50-50.
It is, yeah, they're all
50-50.
They're all pretty much 50-50.
But there's something about you that allows other people to do what it is you say that you do, which is to bare their souls, to share their work and whatnot.
Maybe I'm a good facilitator.
Yeah.
Maybe that comes from teaching writing.
Teaching writing helps.
Yeah, which I've done for 13 years. And some of these people are my past or former writing students.
And so that's how you discover them.
Yeah, exactly.
So you're the guy who's sort of initiating it, like, hey, how would you like to...
I'm the agent out at the farm team saying, let's go to the big leagues. And of course, once Steve Sullivan of Walkabout Publishing up in Wisconsin asked me to do a genre collection so he could publish it, and this is something I'd heard of, publishers approaching authors. I'd never witnessed it before and probably never will again.
Yeah, that's one of those myths, right?
Yeah, right. It became highly motivating, A, for me to write more, and B, for others to jump on board. I was able to say to these, what did I say, 14 other people, not work on something with me that may one day be published, but work on something with me that will be published in a book in February 2011.
So you got a deadline, you got a purpose.
Yeah, and an assurance of publication. So that helped.
That's pretty motivating for most people. Pretty motivating.
Yeah.
One other thing I've noticed about your work is, and you say this in your preface to this anthology, is that you sort of see film, writing for film, and writing for fiction differently. You want to talk about that a little bit? Mm-hmm.
Differently and the same.
Well, yeah, there's the genre nature. You like to do the horror and the sci-fi stuff more in film than you do in fiction, and it seemed to me in these stories there's a little crossover.
Exactly. There's an inverted ratio for me in my 30 years of semi-professional and professional writing and filmmaking. The vast majority of my film work has been genre: science fiction, horror, dark comedy, with some mainstream / literary film making. And then in fiction, the vast majority of my writing has been mainstream / literary with a little bit of genre here and there. You're right in that this book, a requested genre collection from this publisher, is a genre book that nonetheless has at least one foot in a more mainstream literary tradition. I think of it as a genre book that I believe works for fans of genre fiction, but also for just fans of good mainstream / literary fiction. For me, genre is not escapism. It's the opposite. For me, science fiction, speculative fiction, dystopian fiction are not about a journey to the stars. They are Earth-based, often Earth-bound, and they are rather the funhouse mirror held up to show us where we are and where we're headed. Soylent Green, very influential movie on me when I was a kid. It scared the hell out of me. You know, that's not escapism. That is a cautionary tale. And for me, very often, this genre stuff is cautionary or it's socio-cultural critique. And I know we'll get into that because you've mentioned a couple of the stories from Unforgettable that you want to get to.
Right.
Yeah.
How about giving us a sample of a collaborative story that works on all the levels we've been discussing?
Okay. This is...
I like this one, Strongest.
Strongest. I wrote with Eric Green. He is a genre scholar who authored my favorite scholarly book, Planet of the Apes as American Myth, Race, Politics, and Culture. Came out a dozen years ago. Terrific book. And he had this idea for a story called Strongest, and he started it, but I think by the end it was pretty close to 50-50. From one sea all the way to the other, the warrior king was the strongest man in the land. As far as anyone knew, he was the strongest in any land, which meant that he was the strongest in the world. Any territory he wanted, he claimed. Any treasure he coveted, he seized. Any woman he desired, he took. The land, the wealth, the power, the sex, the strength, all were without boundaries, without borders, without end. And he enjoyed it, all of it. He reveled in it, soaked in it, breathed it all in. But he wanted more, always more. And when he had taken all there was to take, reached out his hand and conquered everything and everyone, far and wide, farther than anyone but he himself had dreamed possible, just then he started to hear things. Whispers and rumors and legends. Whispers of power even greater than his. Rumors of sources as yet untapped. Legends of a magical spring that emerged from underground at the center of the world, then flowed uphill to a pool atop the highest of all mountains. Any man, it was said, who drank from the pool of the spring that spanned the world would himself obtain the very strength of the world, the power of the sea, the might of the forests, the hardness of stone. All would be his forever. He queried all who spoke of the pool, and in so doing traced the tale to a mysterious oracle whose whereabouts were unknown. He told himself that as a mystic she may have been mad. For that matter, she may have been less mystic than myth, for none of the witnesses could say where to find her. They spoke of glimpses, glimmers, appearances that could be neither predicted nor confirmed. One man reported glancing away from the oracle for but an instant, then looking back to find her gone. A young girl claimed that the woman cast no shadow in the setting sun. Each story the warrior king heard seemed less credible than the last. Still, something told him that the mystic was real, and that she spoke the truth. For all his strength and cunning, he had little wisdom. From what he'd heard, though, the mystic sounded very wise indeed. For the witnesses told him of how she spoke, the way in which she carried her tall and slender self, a calmness, an alertness, a quietness, all of which made him wonder if she indeed could see beyond what others saw, understand what others could not. And that idea frightened him. For if she told the truth, if the pool existed, then it could be found by another, who then could supplant the warrior king as the strongest in the land. His own territory then would be seized, his treasure would be plundered, his women would be his no more. Over time, his fear grew, became an obsession. He had to find the pool, drink from it, draw strength from it, and then, with that newfound strength, destroy it. He journeyed to the base of the mountain, and then he began to climb, determined to reach the highest of the high, the loftiest place in all the world. Even for someone of his inestimable strength, ascending to that ultimate summit would be a monumental challenge. No one had ever accomplished such a feat, but he was driven, and so he pressed on. Finally, battered and spent after 12 blistering days and 12 freezing nights, he reached the summit. And there at the top of the jagged peak, he indeed found a pool. How had the oracle known? Could her sight truly have extended that far? Or might she have been here once herself, but lacked the courage to drink? If so, he told himself, then she was not wise after all, but the queen of fools. He knelt beside the pool and gazed down at the surface as the sun caressed it. The water looked calm and inviting. He dipped his hand inside. The water felt clean and light. He placed his lips to the surface. The water tasted alive. He drank. And as he drank, hungrily, then greedily, then desperately. The life and the strength of the water coursed into him, through him. He felt the life and the strength sliding down his throat, filling his belly, shooting out into his limbs, and so he kept drinking. Finally, when his body could take it no more, he began to push himself back up and felt the ground crack under his hands. His fingers closed around a nearby boulder, which crumbled to dust at his touch. As he stood, he heard his heart pumping the blood through his veins, felt his muscles engorge, his extremities extend, his maleness grow stiff and strong. His steely blue eyes widened. He could see every movement of air and insect. His ears opened. He could hear every sound in all creation. His nostrils distended. Smells richer and more varied than he'd ever imagined streamed into his nose. He leapt into the air, crimson tresses flying. With a speed and precision that surprised and delighted him, he caught a falcon in his fist, popped it into his mouth, and had it half eaten before his feet had hit the ground. Its blood and flesh and feathers tasted like victory. He stood tall, unrivaled and triumphant. His body was fire and power. Just beneath his alabaster skin, the force of the pool flowed through every part of him. He was undefeatable, unstoppable. Nothing was or ever could be beyond his reach. No one would ever be stronger. And then he felt his breath coming faster, then faster still, as if his lungs could not draw in enough air to sustain his great strength. He felt the blood surging through his vessels with such force that it began to hurt. The sights he saw enveloped him. The light entering his eyes pierced his brain. His eardrums nearly shattered under the merciless din. His muscles expanded so fully and so far that he could no longer move his limbs. He stood there, hard as rock, all of him, and just as immobile. Then, through the panic, through the unbearable tension in his body, the sounds that drilled their way into his ears, the overwhelming smells engulfing his brain, he detected something, heard footsteps, felt the air shift in the wake of motion, smelled someone else's breath close by. So bombarded were his eyes by myriad visions, he had to squint and blot out everything else to see the face right in front of him, the face of someone standing just a little lower than he. It was a face he'd never seen before, yet recognized from the descriptions of others. The mystic. She was smiling slightly, yet her brown eyes betrayed a hint of sadness. "I'm the strongest," he tried to tell her, though his lips and tongue were as stone. "The strongest." She reached out with one fingertip and ever so gently touched the warrior king, who immediately shattered. I've left Gary speechless.
I don't know. Do I want to be stronger than I am now, or weaker?
It depends.
So in that story, how do you do the collaboration? I mean, there's this other thing about the monster taking on human qualities so that we start to sympathize a little bit and see certain characteristics of ourselves. Mm-hmm. And how does that go in a collaboration? How do you come up with the mystic, you come up with the pool, you come up with the monster, and at some point the language has to take over, right?
Right. In this case, Eric Green came up with the premise and the broad strokes. And then I began to fill it in and make a few changes. He had the oracle as a man, for instance. I decided to make her female. I decided to color code the story a little bit. There are 3 color references to the warrior king: red tresses, alabaster skin, and steely blue eyes. Think about those 3 colors and think about who we might be talking about. Red, white, and blue. Has America taken the path of the warrior king? Have we made ourselves so strong that we're brittle and vulnerable? And if that's the case, who is the mystic? You know, if archetypally the man represents physical strength and the woman, Sophia, represents wisdom, then is that maybe the path for the warrior king to try to follow before it's too late? Not to spell everything out for you, but
right.
I did.
Wait,
sorry.
That's what you have to do theoretically in order to write it and not say it, right? Otherwise, you're writing a newspaper editorial.
That's exactly right. And my fiction writing professor back in college, Mark Dinton-Foss, wonderful novelist, he said, you know, Paul, save it for the op-ed page. If you want to write your anti-racism, anti-sexism, anti-war stories, you know, rather focus on characterization. Focus on bringing moments to light and to life in vivid detail. That's what I try to do. Now, a piece like Strongest, characterization is not its strong point because it's a fable.
Right.
And a parable and an allegory.
There's a lesson there.
Yeah, clearly. But most of the pieces in the work are less fabulistic and more character-driven fiction that happens to have a genre element or three.